I was walking through a rural district in South Korea recently, and I came across this primary school. It looked brand new. The architecture was, high-end playground equipment, vibrant colors. But as I got closer, the silence was just deafening. No shouting, no bells, nothing. The gates were chained shut. And through the glass, I could see the stack of textbooks unopened from 3 years ago, just covered in a thick layer of dust. The scene that's repeating all across the country. I think over 4,000 schools have already closed their doors. You expect people to be devastated, right? To see communities fighting to save these, hubs of the future. But when I talked to a local shopkeeper nearby, his reaction was, it was chillingly detached. He didn't complain about the loss of the children or the death of the neighborhood. Instead, he just pointed to a construction crew across the street. They were gutting an old middle school. He said, they're turning it into a nursing home. And then he shrugged. At least that's a business with a growing customer base. That casual pivot from educating the next generation to warehousing the last one, it just reveals this profound systemic shift. To a rational observer, this isn't just a demographic dip. It feels more like a necrotic shock. We've built a society that's so hyper-competitive, so focused on individual success, that we've accidentally made starting a family a kind of economic suicide. The school closures are the physical evidence. It's a civilization basically cannibalizing its own future to service the present. It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? We worked so hard to build a world worth inheriting, only to realize we've created an environment where no one wants to bring an heir into it. So what happens to a social organism when its primary cells, the family, the school, simply stop reproducing? Well, we're about to find out.
That opening it's just incredibly powerful because it captures the cold, hard logic of this crisis perfectly.
It's beyond just numbers on a chart.
Exactly. We are moving beyond just looking at low birth rates as some kind of policy failure. Our mission today is to really analyze that structural atrophy, the functional collapse of the very social units you just described.
The family, the education system.
Right. And this breakdown, this necrotic shock, it isn't an accident. It's the logical, almost unavoidable outcome of perverse incentives that have been layered on for generations. So we're going to dissect how millions of individual rational retreats from the social contract
are all adding up to something massive.
They're converging to create a civilizational contradiction. The system is consuming itself. And the evidence isn't just on the dusty windows of schools. It's in the financial choices, the emotional fatigue, and even the cultural resistance of the younger generations.
Okay, so let's unpack this with the people who are actually at the heart of it. The physical evidence is the schools, but the human evidence that's in the generation that is now actively opting out. We hear the phrase NPO generation a lot, where N is, well, it's the number of things they've given up.
A chilling variable that just keeps increasing.
It does. But the group that really crystallized this whole dilemma is the Sampo generation. Literally the 3 abandoning generation.
And those 3 abandonments are monumental. We're talking about courtship, marriage, and children.
The absolute foundations of society.
The term actually came about over a decade ago. Reporters started noticing that young adults, in their 20s and 30s, they were often dealing with unstable jobs, crippling student loans.
All the usual pressure.
All the pressures, but amplified. And they were consciously postponing or just flat out refusing these foundational life steps. This isn't just a pause.
It's a withdrawal.
It's a proactive, deeply considered withdrawal from the traditional life path.
I want to push back on that a little bit, on the idea of a proactive withdrawal. Isn't labeling it the Sampo generation giving them a little too much credit for making a rational choice when it feels more like an economic mandate forced on them?
That's a critical distinction to make. I think it starts as a choice, but it absolutely becomes an economic mandate. The cost of entry into what we consider adult life is just impossibly high.
They can't even afford to take care of themselves,
let alone establish the financial and physical foundations you need for a family. I mean, look at the specific landscape. You've got soaring consumer prices, tuition fees that lead to massive student debt that follows them well into their 30s.
And then jobs.
An acute shortage of good jobs outside of the most prestigious companies, and on top of it all, crippling home prices.
Housing is always the anchor, isn't it? You see it in cities all over the world. The second housing costs detach from average wages, everything else starts to unravel.
Absolutely. And the job market just makes it worse. If you're not working for one of the major conglomerates, the cables or, some other top-tier firm, you're facing intense precarity.
Which creates this obsession.
Yes. an obsessive need to get the best specs, the perfect resume, the perfect degree, the perfect certifications.
Just to compete.
Just to compete for a dwindling number of stable, high-paying jobs. And pursuing those specs is itself incredibly expensive, which leads to more debt and delays everything even further.
The sources we looked at suggest this reality fundamentally changes how people even view relationships, that love itself becomes a luxury. How does that actually translate into the day-to-day logistics of, say, courtship and marriage?
Well, it's entirely rational to see it that way, when your entire life is governed by paying back debt and just surviving.
Surviving, not thriving.
Exactly. Any commitment that adds more financial weight or takes more of your time becomes unsustainable. Dating in Korea often comes with certain financial expectations, expensive dates, gifts. Giving up courtship is a radical act of financial self-preservation, and marriage. It's become almost like a performance art, not just a simple union.
A business transaction?
Young people report that it feels like that. At wedding halls, the couple's business specifications, their job, their family background, their housing, are assessed more than their compatibility.
And the cost of the wedding itself is a barrier.
A huge barrier. So if you can't meet these social and legal conditions for marrying, which are all tied to money and assets, the whole thing just feels impossibly distant. The Sampo Generation isn't saying marriage is a bad idea. They're saying it's been priced out of their reality.
And the social consequences of this are just. They're profound. It's not just personal sadness. It's a systemic societal threat.
It is. You see this withdrawal expressed directly in the demographic data. The total fertility rate hit a record low of 0.78 in 2022.
Let's put that in context. For a population to replace itself, you need a TFR of 2.1.
Right. So a rate of 0.78 isn't just low. It's what demographers call lowest low. It's a number you usually only see during a war or a severe famine.
It signals a complete lack of faith in the future. And we have to connect this back to the historical structure. I mean, how did the government let the system get so brittle that millions of people decided to just rationally defect?
Well, this points to a really deep institutional failure when it comes to the family unit itself. Historically, the state had a very clear preference. It delegated a lot of the core social welfare duties directly to the family.
A family was the shock absorber.
Exactly. For economic risk, social risk, elderly care,
Yeah.
the family was expected to handle it. And when the economy modernized so rapidly, that expectation just stayed rigid. But when the economic environment shifts to what we have now, hyper-competition, extreme cost of living, precarious work, the traditional family structure it disintegrates.
It wasn't designed for this.
It was designed for the post-war recovery era, not the digital age. So when that primary social safety net collapses, the burden of starting a new family becomes impossibly high. The government basically outsourced reproduction and welfare to its citizens, and now the citizens are refusing to take the contract.
And this brings us to maybe the most clinical demonstration of this whole problem.
Yeah.
The failure of the government's attempts to just buy its way out of the crisis. We've seen billions and billions of dollars poured into pro-natalist subsidies, cash transfers, housing incentives.
Yes, and this is so crucial to understand. The systemic failure of these massive subsidies is a textbook demonstration of how therapeutic state interventions can't replace the lost organic functions of the family.
They can't just throw money at it.
And they did. They spent over $200 billion since 2006. But if the underlying incentive structure is fundamentally broken, just handing out cash to treat the financial symptom is going to fail every time.
Yeah.
That cash doesn't fix a 16-hour workday. It doesn't fix the lack of public child care. It doesn't fix the deep cultural expectation that the mother has to take on the majority of the domestic and child care burden, which then penalizes her career.
So the society is demanding two parents work full-time.
But at the same time, it's demanding that one parent, usually the mother, act as a solo parent and absorb all the care work. A few $1,000s in subsidies doesn't change that fundamental contradiction. The underlying pathology remains.
So the Sampo Generation is essentially sending a very clear message back to the system. You made it too costly to reproduce ourselves, and no amount of cash can compensate for the exhaustion you've engineered.
Absolutely. The decision to abandon those three pillars, courtship, marriage, children, is the final rational response to an irrational social structure.
This is where the crisis becomes truly existential, because the economic strain isn't just about high prices or debt. It's about status and the crushing, continuous cost of maintaining it. I keep coming back to that anecdote we found about the junior manager, G1. She is the quintessential success story, top of her class, graduate of a prestigious SKY university, junior manager at a global tech giant, and yet she describes her life as a biological tax.
Ji-won's story is the perfect synthesis of this crisis. She sees her own fertility, her own time, her own emotional capacity as a tax she has paid to the system. She spent her entire youth locked away in windowless cram schools, these hagwons, competed ruthlessly just for a seat at an elite university.
Only to find that the prize for winning the race is another race.
An even harder one that demands 16 hours of her day, relentless networking, continuous self-improvement, just to stay where she is.
I mean, just imagine the irony for a moment. She reached the very peak of the social hierarchy her country spent 50 years building. Yet she is the end of her genetic line. Because the climb was so steep, it left her physically, financially, and emotionally exhausted.
Right.
She sees having a child not just as a financial burden, but as a direct threat to the very status she sacrificed her soul to achieve.
We have to analyze the source of this biological tax. And it lies squarely within the hyper-competitive educational structures and this deep cultural phenomenon known as education fever. This fever has effectively turned status-seeking into a direct biological tax on civilizational reproduction.
And it's not just about money.
It's not. It's about time poverty.
Time poverty is a fantastic way to frame it. The tax isn't just the cash you spend. It's the exhaustion, the loss of your own agency, the sheer impossibility of balancing elite success with motherhood.
Precisely. And this is all driven by what economists call a status externality. This concept is vital. South Korean parents are preoccupied not just with their children's absolute achievement, how smart they are, but with their child's education relative to their neighbor's child.
It's a zero-sum game.
A complete zero-sum game. Their family's social status, their child's future. It's all tied up in this constant comparison.
So it's a perpetual runaway race to keep up with the Joneses. But because everyone is just as motivated, the costs just keep escalating, and the finish line keeps moving further away.
And that status externality fuels this compulsive drive to pour massive, disproportionate amounts of money into private education. We're talking about sending kids to hagwons after a full day of school, on weekends, during holidays. The children themselves are often working 14, 15 hours a day.
And if you're a parent, you can't opt out.
To opt out is seen as actively setting your child up to fail in this environment. Culturally inconceivable. This intense investment isn't even about increasing human capital for society as a whole.
It's just about ranking.
It's just to secure a higher rank, a better university seat than the next child.
And this drives the entire financial fallout we've been talking about. The squeeze that created the Sampo Generation is rooted in this obsessive spending on status.
The data supports that completely. In a 2017 survey, the financial burden of raising a child, which is mostly education expenses, was cited as the #1 cause of low birth rates by 43% of respondents.
43%? That's huge.
It's the dominant factor, far more than other concerns like, say, the unequal division of housework. This financial pressure, driven by the status race, is #1.
Let's dive into the economics here for a second, because the findings from that quantitative heterogeneous agent model in the sources are just shocking. We need to explain this clearly. What does heterogeneous agent mean? And what did this model actually prove about education spending?
So the heterogeneous agent model just means the study used a simulation that accounts for the fact that people are different. They have different incomes, different preferences, different starting points. It's not assuming everyone is the same, which makes it much more accurate.
Okay.
And when they ran this simulation, they found a staggering sensitivity. An increase of just 1% in family spending on private education is associated with a 0.3 decrease in the total fertility rate.
Okay, let's put that 0.3 decrease in context. That sounds like a small number, but if you're already starting at a TFR of 0.78, that shift is immense.
It's immensely sensitive. I mean, think of it this way. If a country like the United States had a 0.3 drop in its TFR, you'd be looking at millions of lost births over a generation. In a society like Korea, where the rate is already below 1.0, that 0.3 drop is catastrophic. It proves this competition isn't just inefficient.
It's actively antinatalist.
And when they isolated just the status externality, that obsessive need to be better than your neighbor, the effect was even more telling.
What did they find?
If you remove that relative competition from the simulation, fertility would instantly be 28% higher.
28%, that's the smoking gun.
It is. It proves that the competition itself, not just the raw cost of education, is the mechanism that's killing reproduction. And what's even more heartbreaking is how this affects the most vulnerable families. For the lowest income quintile, the models show that childlessness would fall from 5% to less than 1% if that status externality were removed.
So this isn't just a wealthy obsession, it's a systemic barrier that traps low-income families, forcing them into childlessness because they can't balance status seeking with having a family.
The pursuit of status becomes a zero-sum game that eventually zeroes out the entire population.
And beyond the educational race, there's this physical, immovable obstacle that makes all of this competition even more intense. Housing.
Housing insecurity is foundational. In Korea, you really can't even begin that hyper-competitive journey of parenthood without residential stability.
And stability is extremely expensive.
It's consistently cited as a top obstacle, especially for people in their 20s and 30s. About 24% of them named it as their primary concern. And this problem is made so much worse by the extreme population concentration in the Seoul metropolitan region.
We're talking about half the entire country, right? 50.6% of the national population all squeezed into one region. That's just a staggering density.
And that density naturally intensifies competition for everything. The best jobs are there, the most prestigious schools, and, crucially, the most effective hagwons are also clustered there.
Especially in areas like Daishidong.
Right, the private education mecca. The whole thing becomes this vicious, self-reinforcing feedback loop. You need status to earn enough money, but the cost of achieving that status through education and housing in the right neighborhood directly consumes the resources you would need to reproduce that status in the next generation.
It sounds less like the miracle on the Han River that built the country's wealth and more like the tragedy of the golden goose, where they're destroying the source of wealth itself for a short-term gain. The economic pressures are undeniable, but they are made inescapable by the cultural architecture that's enforcing them. So now we have to look at this powerful sociological dynamic, the intergenerational tension that underpins the whole crisis. The youth aren't just fighting prices, they're fighting history.
And that tension is perfectly personified by a term that younger Koreans use all the time, the kondae. This term isn't just old person. It's a specific derogatory label for older individuals, bosses, parents, political figures, who impose outdated authoritarian thinking.
A critique of rigid, out-of-touch authority.
Exactly. They demand respect purely based on age or title, not on merit or reason.
So what exactly is the substance of these kondae expectations? What are they forcing onto the younger generation? What's the historical context that makes them so rigid?
They are enforcing a life that is defined by fatalism.
Yeah.
This is a sociological concept where people feel excessively constrained by these strictly laid out rules and expectations. It leads to a sense of oppressive social discipline. Your future feels completely blocked in.
And the root of this is the post-war history.
Yes, the shadow of Japanese colonialism, the Korean War, and then the miracle on the Han River era, that period of rapid economic development. The older generation who lived through genuine existential scarcity, they believe that national progress required relentless individual sacrifice. Their whole ideology is pure forward productivity. The kondae mindset is don't stop, or your country will suffer, or don't waste your time.
There's a single correct path.
A single strict path. Study hard, get into a top school, work for a major company, buy an apartment, have kids. Any deviation from that is seen as a threat to national stability.
It's the ideology of relentless forward motion, and it's institutionalized and enforced everywhere, from the family dinner table to the office cubicle.
Exactly. And you see this profound disconnect because the older generation, having achieved prosperity through sacrifice, sees any individual desire for rest or work-life balance as just lazy.
A sign of a weaker mind.
Right. They assume the younger generation lacks fortitude because they haven't faced the same struggles. So they enforce a collective mindset where any difference is immediately labeled as wrong or a failure of character. This intolerance for difference is a key part of the pressure.
That intolerance, that fatalistic rigidity, it must have a profound psychological effect on young people who are trying to survive in this hyper-modern world.
It does. And that's where we can use Durkheim's sociological typology to really understand the youth reaction. The younger generation is caught between two completely clashing cultures. On one side, you have the traditional Confucian collectivism, the fatalistic expectations from the kondae. And on the other, they're exposed to new, globalized values of individualism, self-care, work-life balance, thanks to the internet and media.
So if you're forced to live by two incompatible sets of rules, neither path offers any real stability or moral guidance. That sounds like Durkheim's concept of anomy.
That is precisely the internal conflict. Anomy means normlessness. a sense of cultural ambivalence, where the old values are blurring and the new values aren't fully accepted by the ruling generation.
So you're left not knowing what to believe.
Or how to legitimately pursue happiness. This is the micro-reaction of the individual. And what makes the Korean context so unique is that it really challenges the traditional academic understanding of Durkheim's work. Fatalism, which is oppressive, high societal regulation, and anomy, which is normlessness or low societal regulation. They're usually considered opposite extremes.
But you're arguing they actually coexist here, which is a powerful insight. How can a society be both overregulated and normless at the same time?
Well, fatalism represents the oppressive macrostructure of expectations. Think of it as a severely gridlocked highway. The laws, the Kanti expectations are everywhere, demanding you drive only on this one specific path to success. That's the high regulation of fatalism. Anomy, though, is the micro-reaction. Because the highway is gridlocked and because your personal goals, maybe you want to pull over and rest or take a different job that values time over money, are completely blocked, you feel that normlessness.
Your individual aspirations aren't regulated by society at all.
Because society only recognizes one path. So the intense fatalistic pressure creates the tension that results in cultural ambivalence or anomy among the young. They know what they should do, but they feel that path will destroy them. The term kakane itself is born from this desire to name and resist that oppressive structure.
So if the older generation's rigid, materialistic path, money, cars, status is what the youth see as causing so much unhappiness, even contributing to the country's high suicide rates, the rational reaction is to just pivot entirely away from that definition of success.
That's the core solution the younger generation is pursuing. They're actively resisting that path. Instead of chasing a title, they prioritize quality of life, resting time, and balance.
As protective factors.
As protective factors against unhappiness and suicidal ideation. They're striving for deep contentment over material acquisition. You hear interviewees say that happy people focus on living comfortably within their given circumstances, rather than chasing a kind of wealth that seems perpetually out of reach and emotionally punitive.
It's a profound paradigm shift, a cultural counter-revolution against hypermeritocracy. So when the traditional social contract breaks and the pressure becomes inescapable, the individual has to find a way to survive. We've seen the Sampo Generation abandon the future. We've seen G1 pay the biological tax. When faith in the collective way collapses, the only option left is to turn inward. And this results in what some social critics are calling defensive narcissism, which describes the survival mechanism of this atomized generation.
To fully understand this, we can go back to that anecdote of Minho, the man who decides to invest in his one-room apartment, prioritizing luxury coffee and high-end gaming tech. His approach is key because it reframes this idea of narcissism. It's not just selfishness or hedonism, it's a deeply logical survival strategy.
Right. He calls the traditional long-term pathhouse wife, stable retirement, a collapsing bridge.
That is the core insight of this entire section. If the long-term collective structures are demonstrably crumbling, if you look ahead and all you see is debt, precarity, and exhaustion, why would you invest your limited resources into that?
Why commit to a future that feels fundamentally punitive?
Exactly. So Minho's choice is to stand firmly on the small patch of ground he can control. He focuses on immediate comfort, self-investment, technological escape, because he has lost faith in the collective institutions that once promised a stable future.
For him, the pursuit of individual fulfillment, even if it's lonely, is the only rational form of survival in an atomized society.
It's self-preservation, not simply self-indulgence.
The self, in that sense, becomes the only reliable sanctuary left. The institutional social glue, the stable career, the community safety net, family expectations has either eroded or proven to be a trap.
So overinvesting in the me is lonely, but it is rational when that institutional stability is gone. And this leads us directly to a broader critique of these hyper-regulated modern societies, which connects the Korean experience to the ideas of the psychiatrist and social critic Thomas Szasz.
Szasz's concepts seem surprisingly applicable here. How does his critique of coercive state power shed light on a society that, on the surface, seems so hyperfunctional and organized?
Well, Szasz coined the term the therapeutic state to describe a system where the government or the ruling culture doesn't enforce behavior through old-fashioned punishment. Instead, it pathologizes and cures disapproved actions, emotions, or lifestyles through these pseudo-medical or pseudo-social interventions.
So it's not punitive, it's therapeutic.
It appears supportive, touchy-feely. It wants you to be healthy and happy. But Szasz argued it's ultimately even more authoritarian because it gets to dictate exactly what health and success and normalcy even mean.
So instead of being told, you must obey this law, you're told, if you don't do this, you are mentally unwell or socially maladjusted.
Exactly. The pressure is internalized. It's disguised as personal responsibility or necessary societal health. SAS saw its reach everywhere, from moral injunctions not to be overweight, disguised as scientific advice, to pathologizing natural human stress or unhappiness that comes from structural unfairness. In the therapeutic state, any deviation from the mandated path is defined as an illness that needs to be corrected.
And when we look at South Korea, we see this mechanism operating with just intense precision. The pressure to conform to that one specific productive, mandatory path to elite success is relentless. And the path itself, even if it causes depression, suicidal ideation, the collapse of the family, is reinforced as being necessary for societal health.
Think about the specific pressure points in Korea. The intense pressure on women to endure the burden of solo parenting, where the mother is expected to manage a career and child-rearing with almost no support.
If she can't handle it, it's seen as her failure.
Right, she's pathologized, rather than the societal structure being critiqued. The massive social stigma attached to failing in the education system or choosing a non-elite career. It's all treated as a personal flaw, not a rejection of a flawed system. This all echoes a system of societal control that's disguised as necessary progress. And the younger generation feels they're being forced to live a life that isn't their own.
Trapped.
They're trapped in a high-regulation environment, that's the fatalism, that offers low regulation for their individual goals, that's the anomy. Society demands they sacrifice the self for a collective that no longer feels supportive, which leads directly to that rational, defensive retreat that Minnow exemplifies. The efficiency prize by this society has led to the ultimate inefficiency, the refusal to replicate itself.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? The society that prizes hyper-efficiency in every single sector has inadvertently created a state where the only efficient survival strategy for the individual is to psychologically retreat from society's demands entirely. This system has successfully optimized for everything except its own continuance. So this deep dive has tracked the Korean crisis from that chilling physical evidence of the shuttered schools all the way to the structural collapse of the family unit, embodied by the Sampo Generation.
And we saw how this economic trap is intensified by a fierce, self-cannibalizing status anxiety.
The biological tax of meritocracy.
And it's all enforced by these fatalistic cultural pressures handed down by the Condi generation.
All of which leads, finally, to that widespread psychological retreat into the atomized defensive self.
And the policy implications from all of this are just. They're stark. The government spent billions of dollars on pro-natalist subsidies, and they failed to reverse the decline.
Which demonstrates that you can't buy births. Not when the fundamental incentive structure is actively punitive toward having a family.
You can't. These interventions address the financial symptoms without fixing the deep structural and cultural pathology. The failure of these interventions is the clinical demonstration of the whole problem.
It's like trying to treat a mortal wound with a mild painkiller.
It is, and the solution requires more than just financial compensation. It requires a profound cultural transformation, which is a massive, maybe even existential task. The society has to interrogate these very narrowly defined standards of success that rank order everyone.
They have to somehow end the self-cannibalizing competition.
In education, in housing, it's consuming generations. And on top of that, they must radically disrupt the traditionally conceived gendered norms that assign the majority of child-rearing and household burden to women, which penalizes their careers and makes childbirth a logistical impossibility.
It's about reimagining what a fulfilling life even looks like.
Outside the gold-plated cage of hypermeritocracy, it's about restoring that lost collective spirit and institutional support for families.
We've seen in South Korea a clinical demonstration of what happens when a society works so hard to secure a better future one based on endless efficiency and meritocratic success that it inadvertently eliminates the next generation required to inherit it. It is the cost of efficiency taken to its final lethal extreme.